I never believed in legends. Not once in my 68 years did I think the stories whispered around campfires held any truth beyond the desperate need humans have to explain the unexplainable. I was a man of science, a geologist who spent for decades mapping the forgotten corners of the Himalayas, measuring rock formations, analyzing mineral deposits, and cataloging the slow, indifferent violence of tectonic shifts. The mountains were my church, but I worshipped only what I could touch, measure, and prove. Until 1983, when everything I thought I knew shattered like ice beneath a climber's boot. My name is Dr. Samuel Harrow, and this is my confession. Not to a priest, not to a judge, but to whoever finds these words after I'm gone. The government came 3 days ago. They didn't knock. They never do when they want something badly enough. They tore through my cabin in the Rockies with the efficiency of men who'd done this before, searching for something they'd spent 40 years trying to find. And they found it. Or rather, they found him. I kept him hidden for 40 years. 40 winters of secrecy, of lying to colleagues, of turning away expeditions and misleading search parties. 40 years of protecting the greatest discovery in human history, not because I wanted glory, but because I knew what glory would cost him. If you're captivated by this impossible truth, don't miss what happens next. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a chapter of the most shocking story ever told. They say confession is good for the soul. I don't know about that. But I know that silence has been eating me alive, and now that they've taken him, now that the world will soon know what I've hidden, I need to tell the truth. The whole truth, from the beginning, before they twist it into something it never was. It started with a storm. February 1983. I was 32 years old, arrogant with the confidence that comes from surviving 3 Himalayan expeditions without serious injury. The kind of arrogance that makes you ignore warning signs, that makes you push forward when every instinct screams to turn back. I'd been hired by a mining consortium to survey a remote valley in the Nepalese Himalayas, near the Tibetan border. The pay was exceptional because the location was brutal, nearly 17,000 feet elevation, accessible only by a 3-day trek through terrain that had killed more experienced climbers than me. But I needed the money, and I needed to prove something to myself after a failed relationship and a research paper that had been laughed out of academic circles. The Sherpas who guided me to base camp were quiet men, their faces weathered by altitude and wisdom I was too young to recognize. They set up my equipment, accepted their payment, and prepared to leave. That's when the oldest one, a man named Tenzing with eyes like chips of obsidian, placed his hand on my shoulder. "The mountain does not want you here," he said in heavily accented English. 3 times the birds have flown wrong. The wind speaks of anger. You should come back with us. I laughed it off. Birds and wind. The superstitions of people who'd never held a geology textbook. I thanked them, assured them I'd be fine with my satellite phone and emergency beacon, and watched them disappear into the white silence that surrounded me. That night, alone in my tent with only the hiss of my camp stove for company, I heard my first sound that had no explanation. A low, guttural vocalization that seemed to roll down from the peaks above, too deep to be wind, too structured to be random. It raised the hair on the back of my neck, but I forced myself to rationalize: rockfall creating acoustic anomalies, thermal expansion of ice, maybe even a distant avalanche channeled through the valley in strange ways. I spent the next 2 days taking samples, photographing formations, and filling my notebooks with data. Professional. Methodical. Ignoring the growing sense that something was watching me from the ridges above. On the 3rd day, I found the first footprint. The print was in a snowfield I'd crossed that morning, a route I'd specifically chosen because the fresh powder would show any animal tracks. I'd seen none on my way up. But on my return, there it was, pressed deep into snow that couldn't have been more than 2 hours old based on the crystallization patterns around the edges. 15 inches long. 7 inches wide at the ball. 5 distinct toes with what appeared to be claw or nail marks. The stride pattern suggested a bipedal gait, each step nearly 5 feet apart, indicating something tall, very tall, and moving with purpose. I knew bear tracks. I documented them across 3 continents. This was not a bear. The metatarsal impression was wrong, the toe arrangement was wrong, the depth and distribution of weight were wrong. This was something that walked upright, something heavy enough to sink 8 inches into packed snow, something that had followed my exact route and then diverged toward a cliff face that should have been impossible to climb. My hand shook as I photographed it, using my ice axe for scale. The scientific part of my brain was cataloging details, forming hypotheses. The primitive part, the part we've spent millennia trying to civilize away, was screaming at me to run. I didn't run. Instead, I followed the tracks. They led me along the ridge for nearly a mile, each print perfectly placed, showing no hesitation or uncertainty in terrain that had me gasping for breath and gripping my ice axe with white knuckles. Then they stopped. Not gradually fading or being obscured by wind, but simply ending at a boulder field as if whatever made them had either taken flight or ceased to exist. This story only gets more incredible from here. Make sure you're subscribed. The next revelation will shake everything you thought you knew about what's hidden in our world. That's when I smelled it. A stench so powerful and alien it made my eyes water, like rotten meat mixed with sulfur and something else, something musky and biological that I'd never encountered. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, carried on the thin mountain air that suddenly felt too thick to breathe. I turned in a slow circle, scanning the rocks, the ice fields, the distant peaks. Nothing. But the feeling of being observed intensified until my skin crawled beneath my thermal layers. Every survival instinct I possessed told me to get back to camp, pack my equipment, and start the 3-day trek to civilization. I should have listened. The storm hit at dusk, rolling down from the peaks with the sudden violence that makes the Himalayas so deadly. One moment, I could see the valley stretching below my camp, painted in the golds and purples of sunset. The next, I was engulfed in white chaos, wind screaming like something alive and furious, snow slashing at my exposed face with crystalline knives. I barely made it into my tent before visibility dropped to 0. The dome-shaped shelter that had seemed so sturdy during setup now felt like tissue paper against the mountain's rage. I anchored myself in my sleeping bag, checking my supplies by headlamp, 3 days of food, fuel for 5 days if I rationed, satellite phone with 70% battery, emergency beacon ready if things got desperate. I wasn't worried. I'd weathered worse storms. I'd wait it out, maybe lose a day or 2 of work, then complete my survey and head home with data that would secure my next grant. Simple. Professional. Under control. The wind died at exactly 2:47 a.m. I know because I was checking my watch every few minutes, unable to sleep despite my exhaustion, kept awake by the assault of sound that had been constant for hours. The sudden silence was somehow worse than the noise. In that absolute quiet, I could hear my own heartbeat, the whisper of my breath, and something else. Footsteps. In the snow outside my tent. Heavy, deliberate footsteps circling my position. I held my breath, every muscle frozen, listening with such intensity one thought my ears might bleed. The steps were slow, methodical, pausing every few paces as if whatever was out there was examining my tent, considering it, deciding something. I wanted to believe it was a yak that had wandered up from a lower herder camp, or even a snow leopard investigating a strange intrusion into its territory. But the steps were wrong. The rhythm was wrong. The weight distribution was wrong. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the footsteps moved away, crunching through snow toward the boulder field. I waited another hour, shivering despite my cold weather gear, before I dared to unzip my tent enough to peer outside. The storm had passed, leaving the world transformed into an alien landscape of sculpted snow and crystalline silence under a sky so full of stars it hurt to look at them. My headlamp beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the area around my tent. Tracks, dozens of them. The same 15-inch prints, circling my camp in a perfect spiral that tightened with each rotation until the closest one was less than 3 feet from my tent wall. They were deep, far deeper than any tracks should be in the wind-packed snow the storm had left behind. Whatever made them was impossibly heavy, impossibly real. And in the center of the spiral, placed deliberately on a flat rock where I'd been sitting to eat dinner, was a gift. It was a bone. Not just any bone, but a femur, human by the look of it, ancient and weathered, with strange markings carved into its surface. Symbols I'd never seen before, geometric patterns that seemed to shift and reform in my lamplight, making my eyes hurt when I tried to focus on them. My first thought was archaeological significance. My second thought was horror. Because no human should have been up here, certainly not long enough ago for a bone to weather like this. And no animal would carve symbols, would place an artifact with such obvious intention. I picked it up with shaking hands. It was ice cold, far colder than it should have been even in the freezing night air, and the moment my skin touched it, images flooded my mind. Not images exactly, more like impressions, feelings, memories that weren't mine flooding through my consciousness. I saw the mountain as it had been 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, covered in forests that climbed impossibly high, home to creatures that had no names in any language I knew. I felt loneliness, profound and ancient, the last of something watching the world change, watching its kind vanish into legend and memory. I felt warning, urgent and desperate, a message pressed into my mind with such force it drove me to my knees. Leave. Forget. Tell no one. The mountain is not yours. The truth behind this encounter defies everything we know. Stay with us, subscribe now and witness what happens when science meets the truly unknown. I dropped the bone like it was burning me, and the vision stopped instantly. I knelt in the snow, gasping, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. The bone lay between my knees, just an old piece of carved bone again, but I couldn't touch it. Couldn't even look at it directly. I don't remember getting back into my tent. I don't remember falling asleep. But when dawn broke 3 hours later, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold, I woke with a decision already formed: pack everything, start the trek back to civilization, file my report with fabricated data, and never speak of what had happened here. I was zipping up my backpack when I heard it. A sound that made the previous night's footsteps seem like nothing. A vocalization that was part roar, part scream, part something that bypassed my ears entirely and resonated in my bones. It came from above, from the cliff face that rose behind my camp, and it carried emotions I could feel: fury, sadness, and something that might have been pleading. I looked up. And there, silhouetted against the dawn sky on a ledge that should have been inaccessible, I saw him for the first time. He was massive, 8, maybe 9 feet tall, with shoulders broader than any human's, covered in thick fur that ranged from white on his chest and belly to dark brown, almost black on his back and limbs. But it wasn't his size that froze me in place. It was the intelligence in his eyes. Even from 100 feet away, even in the uncertain dawn light, I could see the awareness in them, the consciousness, the understanding. He wasn't an animal. Whatever he was a person. We stared at each other for what felt like forever. I forgot to breathe, forgot I was cold, forgot everything except those eyes studying me with an intensity that stripped away every pretense, every lie I'd ever told myself. He was reading me somehow, assessing me, and I had the distinct impression that my life hung in the balance of whatever judgment he was forming. Then he moved. Not toward me, but along the cliff face with an agility and grace that defied his size. He flowed over terrain that would have killed any human climber, his movements so efficient and practiced they seemed almost supernatural. Within seconds, he'd covered a distance that would have taken me hours, and he'd positioned himself between my camp and the only route down the mountain. I wasn't being attacked. I was being blocked. My scientific training battled with my survival instincts. Part of me wanted to run, to try to find another way down even if it killed me. But the larger part, the part that had spent years studying the natural world, recognized this behavior. He was herding me, controlling my movements. And the only reason to do that was if he wanted to communicate. I forced my voice to work. "I'll leave," I called out, my words swallowed by the vast silence. "I'll go and I won't come back. I promise." He didn't respond with sound. Instead, he pointed. One massive arm extended, a finger, yes, a finger. He had opposable thumbs, I noted with a clinical detachment of shock, indicating a direction away from the descent route. Away from escape. Toward the deeper mountain, the unexplored regions where my maps showed only blank white space marked unsurveyed. Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to try to run, to use my emergency beacon and hope rescue could reach me before he did. But something else, something deeper, made me understand, if he'd wanted me dead, I would already be dead. He'd circled my tent. He could have torn through the nylon like paper. He wanted something else. And whatever it was, fighting would only ensure I never learned what. I nodded slowly, trying to project calm I didn't feel. "Okay," I said. "I'll go where you want. Just, please don't hurt me." Something flickered across his face, an expression I couldn't read but that reminded me unsettlingly of human sadness. Then he turned and began moving into the mountains, pausing every few dozen feet to look back, making sure I was following. I picked up my pack, left my surveying equipment where it lay, and followed the Yeti deeper into the Himalayas. We traveled for 6 hours. Not climbing, but traversing, moving horizontally across terrain that didn't appear on any map I'd studied. He led me through ice caves that glowed blue in the dim light, across snowfields so pristine they hurt my eyes, past frozen waterfalls that hung like crystalline curtains. Every 15 minutes or so, he would stop and wait, patient as stone, while I caught my breath and my burning legs remembered how to move. He never looked back with impatience or anger. If anything, his body language suggested concern? Care? I was anthropomorphing, I told myself. Projecting human emotions onto an unknown species. But it was hard not to when every gesture, every pause, every glance seemed to carry such obvious intent. Around midday, we reached it. A valley so hidden I would have walked past it a dozen times without noticing. The entrance was a narrow crevasse in a cliff face, barely wide enough for him to squeeze through sideways, nearly invisible from more than 10 feet away. Inside, the crevasse opened into a passage that wound through the mountain like an intestine, sometimes so tight I had to remove my pack and push it ahead of me, sometimes opening into chambers where my headlamp couldn't find the ceiling. Then we emerged into impossibility. The valley was perhaps 2 miles across, ringed by peaks so sheer they seemed to lean inward, creating a bowl that trapped warmth and moisture. Against all logic, against every rule of altitude and climate I knew, there were trees here. Not the stunted, twisted survivors that cling to life at timberline, but real trees, pine and something else I couldn't identify, with leaves that seemed to glow faintly in the diffused sunlight. Steam rose from hot springs scattered across the valley floor, and I could hear running water, see patches of actual green grass between the snow. It was a microclimate, a geological impossibility, a pocket of livable space preserved in the heart of the death zone. And it was his home. What happens next will change everything you thought you knew about what lives in the hidden places of our world. Make sure you're subscribed, you won't want to miss a single moment. He led me to a cave on the valley's far side, its entrance half hidden behind a thermal spring that kept it warm enough that ice never formed. Inside, the cave was deeper than my light could penetrate, but the front chamber had clearly been lived in for a very long time. There were tools, rocks shaped into implements, bones carved and polished, even what looked like primitive pottery. There were drawings on the walls, done in something that looked like charcoal mixed with minerals, depicting scenes I couldn't fully understand but that seemed to tell a story of loss. And in the center of the chamber, arranged with obvious care, were the bones of his people. Dozens of skeletons, each laid out with reverence, each accompanied by artifacts and markings. A graveyard. A memorial. He was the last. The only one left. And somehow, looking at those bones, at the care with which they'd been arranged, I understood why he'd brought me here. He wasn't threatening me. He was trusting me. Over the next 3 days, we communicated. Not with words, he had vocal cords, I could hear them work when he made sounds, but his language, if he had one, was beyond my comprehension, and my English meant nothing to him. Instead, we used gestures, drawings in the dirt, and something else. Something that happened when I touched the carved bones he offered me, similar to what I'd experienced with the femur but more controlled, more intentional. Through these brief, fragmentary connections, I learned his story. Or at least, I learned what my human mind could comprehend of it. His people had lived in these mountains for thousands of years, long before humans built their first cities, long before we learned to record our history. They were few in number, solitary by nature, each maintaining vast territories that they rarely left. They were intelligent, far more intelligent than their primitive tools suggested, but their intelligence was different from ours. Where we built and changed and conquered, they observed and adapted and remembered. They had watched us grow. Watched us multiply. Watched us spread across the world with our fires and our ambitions and our endless hunger for more. And they had hidden, retreating deeper into the wilderness, avoiding contact, becoming legends and myths as their numbers dwindled. Disease had taken most of them, illnesses carried by humans but deadly to them. War had claimed others, caught in conflicts they didn't understand and couldn't escape. But mostly, they had simply faded, unable to adapt to a world that no longer had space for beings like them. He was the last. Born perhaps a century ago, his concept of time was different from mine, harder to translate. He had spent decades alone, maintaining the burial sites of his ancestors, keeping their memory alive in the only way he knew how. He was the guardian of extinction, the final witness to a species that had existed for millennia but would end with him. And he was dying. I could see it in the way he moved, the occasional tremor in his limbs, the pain that flickered across his face when he thought I wasn't looking. Age, injury, or illness, probably all three. Maybe another year, maybe less. That's why he brought me here. Not to kill me, not to threaten me, but because he needed someone to know. Someone to remember. Someone to tell his people's story after he was gone, so that they wouldn't vanish completely, wouldn't fade into nothing as if they'd never existed at all. On the third night, as we sat by his fire, yes, he knew fire, had known it long before humans claimed it as their unique achievement, he placed his hand on mine. The contact brought the clearest vision yet, not images or feelings, but something closer to words, concepts translated into forms my mind could understand. Asterisk, you are the witness. You carry our memory now. Do not let them find this place. Do not let them make us into specimens and curiosities. Let me rest with my ancestors in peace. Promise this. Asterisk. And I did. God help me, I promised. He let me leave on the fourth day. Guided me back through the passages, back to my abandoned camp where my equipment still sat waiting. The carved bone, the femur I'd first touched, he gave back to me, pressing it into my hands with what I'd come to recognize as his gesture of importance, of sacredness. When we reached the spot where I'd first seen him on the cliff, he stopped. For a long moment, we simply looked at each other, two beings from species that had evolved along vastly different paths, sharing an understanding that transcended language. Then he did something I'll never forget. He bowed. A formal, deliberate gesture of respect that brought tears to my eyes. I bowed back, fumbling, inadequate, knowing that no gesture I made could possibly convey what I was feeling. Then I turned and started down the mountain, not looking back even though I could feel his eyes on me until I rounded the first ridge and he was lost to sight. I filed my report with falsified data, claiming the mineral deposits weren't commercially viable. The mining consortium was disappointed but unsurprised. The Himalayas rarely gave up their wealth easily. They paid me my fee and moved on to other projects. I moved on too, but to a different life. I abandoned geology. Instead, I used my credentials to become a guide and wilderness consultant, taking on jobs that kept me in the mountains, kept me mobile, kept me able to monitor the region where he lived. I built a cabin in the Rockies, remote enough that visitors were rare, close enough to airports that I could reach the Himalayas quickly if needed. The story takes an even more shocking turn. Stay subscribed and keep watching. What the government discovers will leave you speechless. And I went back. Not to the hidden valley, I kept that promise, but close enough to watch, to make sure no one else stumbled onto it. 3, sometimes 4 times a year, I'd make the trek, always alone, always careful, watching for signs of other expeditions, of curiosity seekers, of scientists who might find what I'd found. For 17 years, everything was perfect. He lived his life in isolation, and I protected his secret. Sometimes I'd leave supplies near the entrance to the passages, medicine when I could guess at what might help, food in the lean winter months, tools that might make his existence easier. I never saw him again, but the supplies were always taken, and occasionally I'd find small carvings left in return, gifts that told me he remembered, that he was grateful. Then, in 2000, he appeared at my camp. He was dying. Not the slow decline I'd sensed during our first meeting, but active, aggressive deterioration. He could barely walk, his breathing was labored, and in his eyes I saw something that terrified me more than any threat could: acceptance. He didn't need to explain. Through touch, through gesture, through the bond we'd formed over 17 years of indirect contact, I understood. He wanted to die in warmth, in safety, surrounded by something other than stone and snow and memory. He wanted, at the end, not to be alone. So I did the unthinkable. I brought him home. Getting him down the mountain and eventually to my cabin in Colorado was the most difficult thing I've ever done. It took weeks of night travel, forged documents, a cargo plane whose pilot didn't ask questions when paid enough cash, and every scrap of luck and skill I possessed. But I did it. I brought the last Yeti in the world to a cabin in the Rocky Mountains, and I kept him alive. Not alive, that's the wrong word. I kept him living. There's a difference. For 23 years, from 2000 to 2023, he lived in my basement, in a space I'd converted into something approximating his cave. I installed heated floors, humidity controls, brought in rocks and artifacts that reminded him of home. I learned his dietary needs through trial and error, educated myself in veterinary medicine, became an expert in treating conditions I couldn't name in a patient I couldn't describe. He couldn't go outside, too risky, too visible. But I brought the outside to him. Soil from his valley, which I still visited once a year. Water from the hot springs. Even trees, small ones that I grew in massive pots under full-spectrum lights, trying to recreate the impossible forest of his hidden home. We became friends. Real friends, in a way that transcended species. He taught me his way of seeing the world, patient, observant, connected to cycles and patterns humans had forgotten. I taught him about my world, showing him books and photographs, trying to explain the complexity and beauty and horror of human civilization. He learned to understand English, though he could never speak it. I learned to read his expressions, his gestures, the subtle shifts in his posture that conveyed meaning more clearly than words. He saw television and was baffled by our obsession with stories when the real world provided endless fascination. He saw photographs of cities and wept, not from fear or disgust, but from a deep sadness at how separated we'd become from the earth. He saw pictures of other animals and always asked the same question, conveyed through touch, through shared understanding: are they also dying? Are they also the last? Too often, I had to answer yes. The years passed. He grew weaker slowly, but the warmth and care extended his life far beyond what it would have been in the cold mountains. He had decades he wouldn't have had otherwise, decades of comfort and companionship. I told myself that justified what I'd done, that keeping him hidden was kindness rather than imprisonment. But secrets have weight, and 40 years of carrying one finally crushed me. Someone noticed. Maybe I'd grown careless in my old age, maybe technology had advanced past my ability to hide, maybe it was simply inevitable. But 3 months ago, I detected surveillance, drones flying patterns over my property, cars parked on distant logging roads, the subtle signs of being watched by people who were very good at watching. I knew what it meant. I'd always known this day might come. So I made preparations. I wrote everything down, every detail of our story. I contacted journalists, lawyers, anyone I thought might protect him if the worst happened. And I waited. They came on a Tuesday morning, unseasonably cold for September. Black SUVs, men in suits, guns that they tried to keep hidden but I saw anyway. They had warrants, paperwork, authority granted by agencies I'd never heard of. They were polite, professional, and absolutely implacable. Dr. Harrow, the lead agent, said, and I remember thinking his voice was kind, which somehow made it worse. "We know what you're hiding. We've known for some time. We're here to help." Help. That's what they always say, isn't it? We're here to help. We're from the government and we're here to help. The most terrifying words in any language. I took them downstairs. What else could I do? Fight? Run? He was too weak to move, and I was too old to matter. So I showed them the greatest secret in human history, the last of a species older than our entire civilization, and I watched their faces transform from skepticism to wonder to something calculating and hungry that made my stomach turn. They didn't hurt him. I'll give them that. They were gentle, professional, treating him with the care you'd show to a priceless artifact. Which, I suppose, is exactly what he was to them. Not a person, not a friend, not a being with 40,000 years of history and wisdom and loss. An artifact. A specimen. A discovery that would make careers and reshape our understanding of evolution and human history. They took him 3 days ago. Helicopters, a convoy, equipment I didn't understand. He looked at me as they loaded him into the specialized transport container they'd built, and in his eyes I saw something that broke what was left of my heart, not betrayal, not anger, but understanding. He'd always known this would happen. He'd known when he first brought me to his valley, when he'd trusted me with his people's memory, when he'd come to my cabin to die among friends rather than alone in the cold. He'd known that humans, even the best of us, eventually break our promises. They told me he'd be taken to a facility, kept comfortable, studied non-invasively. They promised he'd be treated with dignity, that his story would be told respectfully, that science and ethics would be balanced. They said all the right things, made all the right promises, and I didn't believe a single word. So I'm writing this. All of it. Every detail I remember, every moment of our 40-year friendship, every secret I swore to keep. I'm writing it down and sending it everywhere I can, newspapers, scientific journals, social media, anyone who might listen. Because if they're going to turn him into a specimen, if they're going to parade the last Yeti in the world as proof of their cleverness and their dominance over nature, then by God, they're going to have to reckon with the fact that he was a person. Not an animal. Not a monster. Not the abominable snowman of legend and campfire stories. A person with intelligence and emotion and a culture that existed for millennia before we painted our first cave wall. A person who watched his entire species die while we flourished, who chose solitude and extinction over the violence of survival, who trusted me, trusted a human, to honor his memory. And I failed him. This isn't just a story, it's a truth that changes everything. Subscribe now and share this widely, because everyone needs to know what's been hidden from us, and what we're still losing. I don't know what will happen to him now. I don't know if the government will treat him with the respect and care they promised, or if he'll end up in a lab somewhere, subjected to tests and experiments justified by the pursuit of knowledge. I don't know if he'll die comfortable and mourned, or alone and frightened, surrounded by strangers who see him as a puzzle to solve rather than a life to honor. What I do know is this: the mountains hold more secrets than we can imagine, and most of those secrets are better left hidden. Not because they're dangerous, though many are, but because our first instinct upon discovering the unknown is to capture it, categorize it, control it. We can't simply let things be. We can't honor mystery. We have to own it, explain it, reduce it to data and specimens and stories we can tell ourselves about our superiority and our understanding. The Yeti existed. They were real as you and me, and they're gone now. The last one is in a government facility somewhere, dying among strangers, his people's memory reduced to scientific papers and documentaries and arguments about evolution and cryptozoology. And I'm here, in this cabin, writing these words as my confession and my warning and my grief. I kept him hidden for 40 years, and maybe that was wrong. Maybe I should have let the world know, should have risked his safety for the advancement of science and human knowledge. Or maybe I was right to keep the secret, right to give him decades of peace and dignity and friendship at the end of his species-long history. I don't know anymore. The line between protection and imprisonment is thinner than I ever imagined. What I do know is this: if you're reading these words, you are now part of the conspiracy. You know what I know. You carry the same burden I've carried, the knowledge that we're not alone, we've never been alone, and the other minds we share this world with are vanishing one by one while we pretend not to notice. The mountain still holds its secrets. The hidden valley where his ancestors are buried remains undiscovered, protected by distance and weather and the sheer improbability of finding something so deliberately hidden. I won't reveal its location, that's the one promise I can still keep. His people deserve to rest undisturbed, to fade into geological time without becoming tourist attractions or archaeological sites. But he deserved better than this. Better than me, better than the government agents with their promises and their containment protocols, better than a world that sees the unknown as something to be conquered rather than respected. I'm sorry, old friend. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I brought you into a world that will never understand what it lost when your people faded into legend. I'm sorry that the only story humans seem capable of telling is one where we're the heroes, the discoverers, the intelligent ones, while everything else is just scenery or obstacles or specimens. You were more than that. You were a person, a culture, a way of seeing the world that we desperately need but will never learn. You were my friend, and I failed you. The mountain remembers. The stones remember. The wind and the snow and the ancient ice remember. And now, through these words, perhaps a few humans will remember too. Remember that we share this world with consciousness other than our own, and that our dominion over nature is not a right but a responsibility we failed to honor. 3 days have passed since they took him. 3 days of silence in this cabin that was our home for 23 years. The basement feels like a tomb now, empty except for the artifacts he left behind, carvings, drawings, the physical evidence of a life lived in hiding. I should destroy them. That's what he would want, what I promised when we first made our bargain in that hidden valley 40 years ago. But I can't. They're all that's left of his people, the last remnants of a species that walked this earth for longer than we can comprehend. Destroying them would be erasing the final proof that they existed, that they mattered, that they were here. So I'm keeping them. Hiding them in a place the government will never find, the same way I hid him for 40 years. And I'm writing this account, this confession, this testimony, hoping that someone will read it and understand what we've lost. Not just a species. Not just a scientific curiosity or a cryptozoological prize. But a mirror that showed us what we could have been, patient instead of aggressive, observant instead of exploitative, content with existing rather than constantly needing to conquer and claim. They say confession is good for the soul. I don't know if I believe that anymore. But I know that silence is a kind of death, and he's already died too many times, his people, his culture, his freedom, and soon his body. The least I can do is make sure his story doesn't die with him. So I confess. I confess to hiding the greatest discovery in human history. I confess to lying to colleagues, governments, and institutions for 40 years. I confess to choosing friendship over science, secrecy over glory, one being's dignity over humanity's collective knowledge. And I confess that I would do it all again. Every single day of those 40 years, every lie, every hidden moment, every sacrifice. Because in a world that treats everything different as something to be studied, catalogued, and controlled, the greatest act of love is sometimes simply letting something be. The mountain is not ours. The secrets it holds are not ours to take. And the beings who chose to fade into legend rather than bend to our dominion deserve to be honored, not captured. I am 74 years old. The government has made it clear that charges may be filed: obstruction, fraud, violations of laws I'd never heard of. I don't care. What are they going to do? Put me in prison? Take away what little life I have left? They've already taken everything that mattered. If you're reading this, know that the impossible is real. Know that we're not as alone or as intelligent or as dominant as we think we are. Know that the legends have truth in them, and that truth deserves respect, not exploitation. And know this: the mountain still guards its secrets. The hidden valley remains undiscovered. And when I die, whether in a prison cell or this cabin or somewhere in between, the location dies with me. His ancestors will rest undisturbed, as they should, as they deserve, as I promised. The government has the last Yeti. But they'll never have his people's graveyard. They'll never find the valley where his species lived and died and dreamed of a world they couldn't survive in. That secret stays buried, lost to geological time, protected by distance and silence and one old man's final act of defiance. I am Dr. Samuel Harrow. I am 68 years old. For 40 years, I hid a living Yeti in my home, protected him, cared for him, and called him friend. And when the government finally found out, they took him away to be studied, documented, and turned into proof of their own cleverness. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is my warning. The mountains are not empty. The legends are not fiction. And the last guardians of the wild are dying while we celebrate our conquest of nature. He trusted me. I failed him. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't wait until it's too late to honor what deserves honor, to protect what deserves protection, to let mystery remain mysterious instead of reducing everything to data and specimens. The mountain remembers. I remember. And now you remember too. May we all be forgiven for what we've done, and for what we're still doing, to the wild and wondrous things that share this world with us. That is my confession. That is my story. That is the truth they don't want you to know. The Yeti was real. He was my friend. And he deserved better than us. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes to what we're losing, then share it. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and spread this truth as far as it can go. The government can silence one old man, but they can't silence everyone. Let his story be heard. Let his people be remembered. Let the world know what we've lost, and what we're still losing, while we chase progress and forget what truly matters. Share this story. Remember his name. Honor the wild places and the wild things. Before they're all gone forever.